What's going on, folks? Nate here at Tool Dyno Works, and I'm just now getting around to doing some velocity stack testing on our ZX4R test bike. ZX4RR test bike, actually. ZX4s are for you Canadians right now. Anyway, we have the Graves low mount full exhaust system back on this thing, because that is the highest performing system we've ever tested on these bikes, and we went ahead and installed the new Graves velocity stacks that they released a couple weeks ago. So we went ahead and reran this guy this morning with just the stock velocity stacks and the DNA air filter in place, and then throughout the afternoon I went ahead and had one of our technicians go ahead and pull the stock velocity stacks out, install the Graves stacks, and we ran it again. We then also tweaked the mapping. I'll be honest with you, there's very slight mapping changes needed for these Graves stacks. We're talking like 5% at the most. So the feeling is not massively different than the stock stacks, but the performance is. And I'll just come out and say it, I'm not thrilled with the results of these stacks. I don't know that I would recommend them in the stock engine configuration. I think these are probably going to be useful once guys get into the engines on these bikes and there's increased compression and other things to improve top-end performance. But let me show you why I'm not happy with them. So this morning after I ran this thing a handful of times, you can see there run 10 is 75 horsepower and 29.3 foot-pounds of torque. That's just what it made with the stock velocity stacks in place in the Graves low mount system with our custom mapping flash into the ECU. And there it is overlaid with run 18, which is my best run after we've adjusted the mapping for the new Graves stacks on the same full low mount exhaust system. And that's just not going the right direction. While there is a incredibly slight change to the very top end of the RPM range, like around 14,700 plus RPMs, you are picking up a few more ponies because the power curve is dipping off a little bit less than it was previously. There's some big kind of torque humps in the power curve that are now smoother, but weaker. I highlight one of them there for you. You can see right about 9,100 RPMs or so. It was making 48 horsepower, and now it's struggling to make 44. It's also lost 10% of the torque in that area. We've gone from 25.25 foot-pounds to about 27.6. And even further up there in the RPM range, to say like 11.5, we've gone from about 27.75 of a foot-pound of torque to 29 flat. So we've lost about 1.25 foot-pounds of torque, and we've lost about 2.8 horsepower. We went from making 63.9 to 61 in that same area. So we're just kind of losing everywhere until the very top end of the RPM range. You actually could make the argument that right there's also an increase at 10,000 RPMs. We did actually pick up about 1 horsepower and half a foot-pound of torque, but that's negligible. That's, you know, just as much a variance of one run to the next, or having done this in the morning versus the afternoon. I mean, that's nothing. So I'll go ahead and remove the overlay here just so you can see that, yes, the power curve actually is smoother with these stacks. There's less kind of humps and valleys in it than there was previously. But again, those weren't necessarily a bad thing, because you were still making more horsepower and more torque in those sort of humps in the curve than you do now. There it is all by itself again. Looks much smoother than the previous stock stacks, but just not really something I'm impressed with. Now, I'm sure the guys at Graves are going to see this and be pissed, because I usually give their products pretty solid and glowing reviews. It's expensive stuff, but you get what you pay for. I can't say that here, and here's a good example as to why. Take a ZX6, for example, which is another bike that we've flashed like several hundred, if not 1,000 of at this point. And we've done a shit ton of exhaust and velocity stack testing on over the years. They're only worth doing, velocity stacks I mean, when you're gaining more than you're losing in certain areas. On a ZX6, the goal, just like the ZX4, is to get power way out there in the RPM range. Nothing sucks more than getting up to, 14,000 RPM, and all of a sudden you're falling off and you're losing power. And you're just not fixing that with these stacks. Here, let me show you what a good example would be of acceptable losses for acceptable gains. There is a 2024 ZX6 with a full M4 exhaust and our custom mapping there on run 22. That is with the stock velocity stacks. With run 21, the red line there, we are making 6 horsepower and effectively the exact same torque. We're actually losing 0.7 foot-pounds of torque, but we're picking up 6 horsepower at the top end of the RPM range, peak to peak. And if we highlight the area way out there at the top end of the RPM range, like 14,200 something RPMs, we're actually picking up like 8 or 9 horsepower. So it's a big improvement. Now, we are losing in some areas. Again, you can't just make power with stacks. You're always robbing Peter to pay Paul somewhere. So we're losing 4 horsepower there. We're losing 4 horsepower there. Sorry, gaining 4 horsepower there, but losing 4 horsepower there. we are swapping 2 horsepower there, but then for a huge gain at the top where all of a sudden it's another 8 horsepower. So in my mind, and in the mind of anybody that's ever built engines or tuned them for any professional level team, those are 100% acceptable losses. We are losing 4 horsepower in one area, gaining 4 horsepower in another, and then 8 at the very top end of the RPM range. In fact, those are the exact velocity stacks that we developed in-house because we were not satisfied with stacks that were out there on the market from other manufacturers for our ZX6 Moto America builds. That type of result is not what we're getting with these stacks on the ZX4. You are losing more than you're gaining, and you are not actually increasing top end virtually at all. So if those results are something that you want, you're okay with the losses through the mid-range, and again, they're significant losses for just a little bit more over rev at the very top end, great, we've got mapping built for you. But is it something that I personally, Nate at 2 Wheel Dyno Works, would recommend doing to your ZX4 with a stock engine in it? No. You're losing more than you're gaining, and that's just not what I'm here to do. Our goal is always to improve performance at every RPM range as much as possible, and these don't do that. Now, I think it is still important to note that these are the only velocity stacks from a major manufacturer currently out on the market for these bikes. These are still very new. Graves has beat everybody so far to the punch for hard parts on these bikes. Kudos to them. But there will be other stacks made for these bikes. I know they're coming soon. I've talked to a couple manufacturers. I know they're in the works. I would wait, personally. And as they're released, we will buy some, and we will go ahead and obviously install them in our test bike and give you some accurate, unbiased comparison data. Because again, we buy all of our test products anyway, so we have no loyalty or allegiance to any of the manufacturers whatsoever. We are here to just give you unbiased results. So as always, if you have any questions, give us a call or shoot us an email, support@2wheeldynoworks.com. We are always happy to help. I can guarantee you will not find higher quality custom mapping for a larger variety of intake and exhaust systems for these ZX4s anywhere else.